There was a lot of resistance to climate action for many, many years. And then somehow between 2015, the Paris Agreement and the momentum that started, and the 2019, with many different forces converging, the youth movement in the streets, and investment money going to climate in a serious way, and a whole other series of things. There was this growing momentum that then hit the pandemic, or was hit by the pandemic. Many people think that COP26 was a failure, particularly because Greta Thunberg has positioned it as a failure in the public and in the media, and she gets a lot of attention from the media. But the reality is, a lot of very interesting things came out of that conference. And then the war in Ukraine started, and that changed completely the calculus, because now the discussion is very much about, should we focus on climate, which is kind of the longer term important issue, or should we focus shorter term on energy security and energy access, and then we will come back to climate afterwards. But as you said, there is a series of crises that every time seem to push part of us to kick the climate issue down the road. The more we delay action, the more action will need to be radical down the road, meaning in the 30s and the 40s. Still a lot of misunderstanding about what's happening. We are now at plus 1.x degrees Celsius of increase in average temperatures. And we know that in order to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, we need to stay below 2, possibly below 1.5. The trend right now leads us to 3.5 degrees of increase in temperature globally in average. Now, some people will say, 3 degrees is not that much, because between winter and summer, we go 20 degrees up or down. And so why does 3 degree matter? Well, it matters because it completely unbalances the Earth systems.
And do you see positive trends in that respect? I mean, some cities, some companies doing the right thing?
There's a lot. First of all, one of the reasons why I think COP26 was in Glasgow last November was successful, more successful than people think, is because there was a sort of a front-loading of cities and companies that or the private sector that took the lead in a whole series of initiatives. And by the way, cities and the private sector have been also playing an important role several years ago when Donald Trump took the United States out of the Paris Agreement. Essentially, a lot of cities, states, and companies in the US said, well, we don't care. We're going to stick to the Paris Agreement anyway. And so essentially, it didn't matter if Trump took the US out for 3 years until Biden came back and with John Kerry brought the US back into the agreement. And so this momentum is really important, and the role of these actors is really good. So that's one good trend. Another good trend is the technological development trend, especially when we take into account the cost of technology. The cost of battery storage has gone down 90-something% in the last 10 years. The cost of solar and wind, actually solar and wind now are the cheapest form of energy production in the world, in many, many places, right? And so this idea that solar is, and the renewables are too expensive or whatever, the price difference is actually literally very close to zero. There is a concept in the climate discussion called the green premium. The green premium is the premium in price you pay for a green product compared to the equivalent dirty product. And the game is to shrink the green premium to zero so that the cost for the alternative, clean, dirty, is the same. And we're getting very close to that in many different ways. If you look at the lifelong cost of an electric car, for example, is not very different from an equivalent gasoline car right now. It used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But we should not remain trapped in that logic. Right now, the situation is very, very different. There are still things that are missing. We need an extensive charging station network and all these kind of things, but we're getting there pretty fast.
In your answer, there is a lot of burden that you put on the private sector, I mean, or responsibility.
Yeah.
And here at this investor conference, I mean, they are all private investors.
Yeah.
They want to know
Yeah.
where are the opportunities. Do you see trends in investment that are positive?
I see trends that are positive, and I see also a lot of trends that are very confusing. Right now, for example, the big discussion in investment is ESG, right? Is environmental, social, and governance kind of driven investment based on those three groups of criteria. But it's a very murky, very confusing kind of space. The rules are not clear. A lot of companies seem to think that it's more a question of transparency and reporting than a question of real action. But even if you increase your transparency in your reporting, it doesn't mean that you're actually acting or that you're having any kind of impact. If you decarbonize your portfolio, great for you, but it doesn't mean that you're actually having any positive impact on the climate situation. So we are in that kind of transition where the rules are not clear, the measurements and the metrics are not clear, they're not shared, they're not agreed upon. And a lot of people are taking advantage of this, the whole space of greenwashing, etc. We can have a different discussion about that, but until we clarify those things, it's going to be very difficult to identify a direction where to purposefully redirect finance. But there is much more money that goes into green now, green in general, technology, and so than there was just a couple of years ago. There are a couple of big questions in the world, and the biggest question of all is how will we collectively, globally, be able to collaborate to confront the big global issues that are climate, pandemics, economic stability, security and cybersecurity, migration. These are all issues that cannot be solved by one country alone or by one grouping of countries alone. This needs global collaboration, and particularly needs the collaboration of the big blocs. China and US, first of all, and then Europe and India. Can these countries, particularly China and US, agree that even though they disagree on many things, including fundamental things, there are superior things that they need to work together to fight? That's a big question. I don't know whether that's going to be possible. But I'll tell you a story. I'm just back from a trip in Antarctica. And Antarctica is a continent 1.5 times the size of the United States, which is owned by no one. Nobody asks you for a passport, and Antarctica is not part of any national borders. Is owned, quote unquote, by the whole of humanity because of an agreement signed in 1959 called the Antarctic Treaty, and a couple of other treaties signed afterwards that are part of the Antarctic Treaty system that essentially define Antarctica as a natural reserve which can be used only for peaceful scientific purposes. And it has been that way since 1959. Now, 1959 is a very interesting date because it was kind of the coldest of the Cold War, right? Just 2 years later, the Berlin Wall started being built. Just 3 years later, 1962, the US deploys nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, and Russia does the same in Cuba. We have the Cuba Missile Crisis. So despite the tensions of that period, because scientists pushed for it, and because governments were able to collaborate above the level of the tensions, they signed an agreement that said this big part of the world is not to be touched. I'm not sure we could sign an agreement like that today in the current context. But the fact that we were able to do it there makes me hopeful that somehow we may still be able to collaborate on big global issues like that.
And how was Antarctica? Like melting or not?
Well, you don't see the melting, although you see pieces of ice breaking off from glaciers and ice sheets but Antarctica is definitely warming up faster than other parts of the world. Antarctica and also the Arctic. Just back in March, there were regions of Antarctica that were 40 degrees Celsius hotter, warmer than the normal average for that season. So the message that Antarctica sends out is really, things are warming up and they are accelerating, so we best act fast.
you.